So, if you have studied logic with any degree of formality, if you have studied rhetoric, then you ought to study poetry as well. And I'm not going to say that you should study poetry without modifying it at least a little, because you're going to think you're actually just studying some poems. In the words of Miss Stokes, you don't study mathematics so you can do it later. Right? Why am I studying this? I'm never going to use it. You study it because it shapes you. You study it for the sake of its truth, beauty, and goodness. So it is with poetry. But you're not just studying a few poems. I also, pardon me, I also wouldn't want to say that you're studying poetics merely. Although that is closer to the mark. Most things are best studied in an integrated and holistic fashion. Poetry is everywhere. And so the quick translation, and I'm using translation to talk about you and your movement, your quick translation into, like, from studying a bit of poetry into applying that to the rest of the world. That's what we're seeking. To see the poetry in everything. To seek the poetry in everything. And then you create a circle where you have feedback. And you are actually creating the poetry and everything. What does this have to do with logic and rhetoric? As I brought up at the beginning. I shall tell thee. A lot of what poetry teaches you is assemblage. Today we have naming of parts. Logic is all about proper assemblage. Then once you've established various ways to assemble things, you also want to establish how particular assemblages will be processed, right? Before we even get into rhetoric, there's still an element of, as soon as you move out of syllogisms, how will this be understood, right? You are responsible for how you are understood, as long as your audience is of a good will. But you can see, of course, that we're moving right into rhetoric now. Ethos, pathos, logos. I ask you, which one poetry applies to, and you say, pathos. But that's because you're a filthy romantic in your heart. What if I told you that different societies have answered that differently? What if I told you that in high medieval England, poetry was seen as a very valid way to persuade? Piers Plowman and Canterbury Tales, they are written to change the world. They have things to say, and not in the impotent romantic way. They actually think they're going to convince you. You're just not equipped to handle it because you think poetry is all about pathos. Poetry can be about logos. That is advanced level work. So here's the easy transition for you to make. Imagine being an Anglo-Saxon. Now that you're imagining yourself being an Anglo-Saxon, you have 3 rings on your right arm, 2 rings on your left, given to you by your liege lord, who's been well pleased with you. You are a leader of men, and therefore possessor of a great word hoard, because you must represent your people before others. An emissary comes forward, he unlocks his treasure trove, and you then unlock yours. And everyone says, ooh, ah, such words this brave warrior wields. He must be a man of authority. Ethos. Poetry establishes ethos. Oh, nice. My son's worked on this a little bit. There you have it. The beginnings of the thought that you might be a better man, a more effective man, with a bit more poetry under your belt. Peace of Christ be upon you.
What day is it today? Remind me.
It's Sunday, Mr. Pension.
Sunday. And what do we do on a Sunday morning, wherever we happen to be? We go to church, you bloody heathen!